Hello and welcome to the Catholic Challenge. I'm your host, Luke Lancaster. And today we have a special guest. Her name is Jackie Angel. Jackie is currently working for the Word on Fire Institute in Texas. That's Bishop Robert Barron's organization. And she was making a lot of videos with Ascension Presents, very popular amongst us younger people like myself. So it's a joy to have her on. How are you doing today, Jackie?
Great. Thanks for having me on. Nice to meet you.
Yes, same to you. Same to you. Alrighty, so today's topic is, of course, going to be a challenge to Catholicism. That's why the program is named that way. Today is going to be a topic that really goes against our culture. Right? It is totally and completely not with what everybody else thinks. And this is the Catholic teaching on contraception. This teaching on contraception is not popular at all, but Catholicism continues to teach it. It doesn't make any sense at all to the modern ears. Right? It doesn't make any sense to frequently a lot of Catholics. In fact, a lot of Catholics don't even understand why the church teaches this, and frequently they don't even practice what the church teaches. So having understanding where is this coming from, the logic behind it, the arguments that the church makes, these need to be known. These need to be popularized, and so hence that's the topic of today. So I'm going to ask Jackie a question. This one is, what is the church's understanding? Why is the church saying that we are not allowed to use contraception? We're told in our schools to have safe sex. We're constantly emphasized to, like, they hand out condoms now in schools. Why does the Catholic Church teach against this?
Well, that's because the church has a teaching on what sex is. Sex is not just recreational, it's not just biological, but that sex, the meaning of sex, is something so much deeper. When a husband and wife get married in the church, we make promises. We say, I promise to love you freely, totally, faithfully, and fruitfully. These are the marks of what Pope Paul VI in Humanae Vitae calls, these are the marks of conjugal love. Conjugal love is basically the husband and wife, the love between the husband and wife. And we get this from the cross, actually, how Christ loves us. It says in Scripture that we can only love because God loved us first. So this free, total, faithful, fruitful, these are the characteristics of conjugal love. And in fact, Pope John Paul, in his Theology of the Body, he says, this is the language of the body in sex. This is, our bodies proclaim this language. I'm loving you freely, totally, faithfully, fruitfully. And in fact, when a couple makes these vows on their wedding day, they're saying with their words, but when a husband and wife have sex, they're actually making these vows flesh. So every time a husband and wife have sex, they're actually renewing their wedding vows. And Pope John Paul said, so when people have sex outside of marriage, they're actually lying with their bodies. They're not telling the truth with their bodies, because the language of the truth of the language of sex is free, total, faithful, fruitful. So he says, outside of that, we are lying with our bodies because we're making a promise that we didn't ever make with our mouths. So as Catholics, we believe that sex has a deep meaning. It's not just recreational, biological, but that sex is for procreation and the unity and the bonding of spouses. So, and we can never separate those two. When we look at the married couple in Ephesians chapter 5, it says that a husband and a wife, it's basically a sign of Christ and the church. Marriage is a sign of Christ and church. The husband and wife become one flesh. Even St. Paul in Corinthians chapter 6, he said that when you join yourself to a prostitute, you're literally becoming one body, one flesh with this person. So unfortunately, our culture, the problem, they don't know about contraception because they don't even know what the purpose and meaning of sex is. That the purpose of sex, right? Like even just biologically, it makes sense that the purpose of sex is to procreate, right? But you literally say that and people think like, no, it's not. It's like, that's the biological purpose. And when people get pregnant and they're having a lot of sex, they're like, what went wrong? It's like, nothing went wrong. Actually, something went very right? Is that you were doing the one thing that actually leads to children. So the reason why contraception is a grave evil, in fact, it's an intrinsic evil, is because if the language of sex is to love freely, totally, faithfully, fruitfully, in the language of contraception is, I'm not giving myself to you totally, and I'm not loving you totally. Basically, I want you, but I don't want the reproductive parts of you. Like, I really don't want all of you. So that's essentially The church says each and every act of sex must be open to the transmission of life. That's what Pope Paul VI said in Humanae Vitae. And it would be like if we said, well, really, does each and every act have to be, not contracepted, open to life? And be like, well, does each and every act of sex have to be with my spouse? Like, couldn't I do it with someone else? Like, if we say that no to like the faithful part, then, again, we're saying like, no, this vow doesn't matter. But yes, to be open to life, every single act, each and every act has to be open to the transmission of life. So that's why the church believes this is an intrinsic evil, is because we are essentially denying the language of the body, of how we were created. And in fact, instead of becoming more integrated as human persons, when we use contraception, it disintegrates us as persons. So it's kind of a short, long answer for your question.
It's perfect. Yeah, so it really is coming down to like, it's against the very nature, the biological, natural, created meaning that God infused human life with, infused this within ourselves, that this is the meaning of sexuality, like that it is totally complete and it's also totally open to life. You want all of the other person, not just some of the other person. You also want the fact that there's a possibility of life being formed from this action. Right, so having perfect openness. I think what's profound is the fact that the church emphasizes this when in reality the rest of the world, it basically, they're engaging in sterile love. Right? It's not open to the life, and it's also just using the other person. Could you expand a bit more? I know that John Paul II talks about that, about being the subject versus being the object.
Yeah, Pope John Paul, pre-Theology of the Body, he wrote a book called Love and Responsibility before he was the Pope. And his main thesis was that the opposite of love is use. That we will, people, you ask them what the opposite of love is. Most of the time they say hate. He said the opposite of love in the future, the opposite of love will be that we would use people for our own pleasure. We will use them as objects. Instead of seeing them as a subject, a person, we use them as objects, right? Because only things are meant to be used. Persons are meant to be loved. And so, again, Pope Paul VI predicted this in Humanae Vitae. He said one of the things that will happen if we accept contraception, he said in the future, especially women will be used as objects. They will be degraded because now, right, one of the natural ends of sex is babies. But now if you take that away and you have no consequences, Pope Paul VI basically said, like, there's going to be a general lowering of morality. And we see when contraception was accepted, divorce rates skyrocketed, out of wedlock births skyrocketed, abortion. Ironically, people always think, well, if you have more contraception, abortion's going to go down. But that's not the case, because if you're already thinking that a child is a burden, I don't want a child, and then contraception fails, the next step for that person is, well, I'm going to abort this child. So all these things, promiscuity, out of, premarital sex skyrocketed. All these things happen. And Pope John Paul as well, he said, again, the opposite of love is use. That we are going to use people. And we see this with pornography. We see that for our own pleasure, instead of loving people and seeing them as persons, that we use them for our own pleasure. And when I've spoken to young adults, that's sometimes my challenge. I challenge them is, you guys, we have to see people differently. Because so often, especially when we're single, we look at every single guy or girl as like, oh, I'm going to date them. Oh, I could date them. Oh, we kind of see them as objects. And even when people date nowadays, a lot of times we're not thinking of the purpose of marriage. We're thinking, how can I use this person for my own pleasure? And so it's this whole mindset, right, of not loving a person and wanting the good for them. Because really every single person we meet, every single person in our lives, we should want the best for them. That's real love. And ultimately that means heaven, right? That's the best good that we could will for someone, is to get them to heaven. But unfortunately, we mostly ask the question, how can I get pleasure? And that is the problem with contraception. And any married couple knows, any wife knows when she is being used by her husband. And especially if you are using contraception, then it's like, well, a husband, he just wants his pleasure, and right, like whenever he wants, all right, we can do this, instead of and we'll talk about this more in a little bit, but with natural family planning, right, it's the natural rhythm of the woman's cycle, and learning a woman's cycle, and that the dignity of even the self-mastery, the self-control that you have to have when you don't use contraception. You have to learn how to have self-control. And Pope John Paul was huge on self-mastery, that we should not be, our desires should not master us, but we should have mastery over our desires. But again, our culture just says, whenever you feel it, do whatever you want, right? Like, our culture is a slave to their desires. Well, I want it, I'm going to do it. And so there's no sense of having self-control, and there's no sense of really wanting the good for the other. Our culture is it's all about me, all about the pleasure I can get.
Yeah, I think this really ties in with what Paul said in Romans 12, where he emphasized the renewal of our minds, being able to renew ourselves from the inside, the renewal of our inner man, that we can be transformed by Jesus. That's why we follow Jesus. We walk in the footsteps of our teacher, trying to be formed in him, to see people the way that he sees people, not as things to be used, not what I can get out of, but as people to be loved, people to be seen, subjects. I think there's so much richness and depth to something like that. And I also think that our culture is not understanding the reality of gift, that a child is a gift. What do you think about that, Jackie? But just the fact that children are gifts, and our society thinks that, like, they're trying to avoid, like, they don't want the gift that God wants to give them. Like, God is there, and he has the possibility of creating new life through you. Like, the idea of gift, what do you think about that?
Well, and I mean, that's the teaching of the church, is that children are the supreme gift of marriage and actually benefit the welfare of the parents. Like, they help us to be, I have 4 kids, 7 and under, and they help us to be holier. But that is absolutely the thought of the culture right now, is that children are a burden. And in fact, I just read an article about how there are young women who are sterilizing themselves even before, like, at like 19, 20, because they don't want kids. It's like, and these doctors are like, wait a second, normally people do this after like 2 kids, like, because some of these things that they're asking, it's not just like tying your tubes. It's like, they're like, some of these things can't be reversed or may not be able to be reversed. So are you sure? And it's like, you're not even formed at 19. Your brain isn't even fully formed to make a decision like this. Our minds change so much in our early 20s, but oh my gosh, I mean, just everything, that's kind of coming out. I've reading so many things, like the child-free life, like children are a burden. In fact, Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, back in the day, she was way back in the 1930s, she was championing the pill, because she was part of a population control movement and especially her, they believed that anyone, it was kind of eugenics, which was basically, let's get rid of the poor, let's get anyone who is mentally not fit, basically like anyone who is a misfit. And for their definition, that was the poor, anyone who's mentally disabled or physically disabled, which is completely reprehensible, because we know, obviously, as Catholics, every person is made in the image and likeness of God. But even back in that movement, the pill, or birth control, because the pill didn't come till about 1960, but birth control methods, contraception, she was promoting that as a way of population control. And even since then, saying that children are burdens, and women, you're slaves to your wombs, essentially. You're a slave to the fact that you have to have children and men don't. And what's crazy is I give a lot of talks to young women, high schoolers, young adults, and one of the things that this has caused is a complete hatred of a woman's body. Women are taught to hate being a woman. We are taught to hate our femininity, and we are taught, like, oh, we'll just use the pill, which will essentially sterilize you and make you just like a man. You'll be free. And it's like, whew. Like, when I give my talks to young women, I tell them, like, do you realize, like, what a gift it is? What a gift. Like, our cycles are a gift, that we were the last to be created in all of creation, which means And everything in creation, as you notice in the story of creation, it gets more and more beautiful and more complex. I'm like, ladies, you are the most beautiful and most complex creature in all of creation. And I'm like, do you know why why are you more complex than a man? Why are you inherently more beautiful than a man? It's like, because you can bear life. And guess what the devil hates more than anything? The devil hates love, and the devil hates life. So of course the devil is going to attack love because God is love, and the devil is going to hate life because the devil, it says in John 10:10, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And so the devil hates life. But I try to tell women, like, you are complicated and beautiful by the fact that we can bear life. We can do something no man can. And in fact, Fulton Sheen, who's one of my favorite, Venerable Fulton Sheen is one of my favorites. He gave the analogy. He said, like, when a woman is pregnant, she's like a walking tabernacle of life. Just as you would genuflect in front of a tabernacle, you could genuflect in front of a pregnant woman because she is sacred. And I tell young women, like, this is why a guy gets on his knee to propose, because he's genuflecting in front of you, the fact that you are sacred, that you can bear life. And so as women, we should not hate our bodies, hate our fertility, because that's what essentially the pill does. We're taught, like, oh, well, just cut off your fertility. It's like one of the only things where something completely healthy, we take a pill to render it not working the way it should work, right? Normally we take medications to help our bodies work and function properly, but this is something we take to basically cut off a completely normal, healthy part of us. So if there are women watching, women, you were created beautifully and complex, and this is not something to hate, but this is something that's so amazing. And even just how our cycles are and what happens in our cycle it's mind-blowingly complicated. And the fact that God created this way, again, I joke, I'm like, this is why men will never understand us, because we are so dang complicated. But it's true, like, men don't have cycles. Women have cycles and men don't. Men are just there. You guys are beautiful, awesome, wonderful, image and likeness of God. But women are so complicated by the fact that we are created with a cycle, and it's not something to hate, but it's something to, again, love about being a woman. This is like the feminine, part of the feminine genius. Like, we have so many beautiful things part of us, and having a cycle, again, we're taught to hate it. We're taught that children are a burden, and I'm gonna say embrace it. Again, be countercultural and say, no, I'm sorry, I'm pretty awesome because I'm a woman and I can bear life.
Yeah, be a rebel there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like when you keep getting this steady diet of understanding that human beings, like, it's all about using each other. It's all about what you can get out of it, and the steady diet of that children aren't gifts, that they're just, they're a massive burden, and nobody wants that. There's just a lot of stress, a lot of headaches. Nobody wants that. But that's not what God meant everything for. He meant us to have children. He meant them to be gifts to us. So something that contraception is trying to push aside from us. And I think you mentioned also about health, like healthy way of living. Contraception is extremely unhealthy for you as well. You had written an article about that, and you had made a video for Ascension Presents on that. I think that is just incredible. Like, if we can understand just what it's even doing to our bodies, what contraception does. Could you expand more about the scientific, like, background to what happens, like how it isn't actually healthy to be taking the pill?
Right. Yeah. Hormonal contraception, like the birth control pill, or even like certain IUDs, which are hormonal contraception, they use synthetic hormones of progesterone and estrogen, which are not the same as, like, our brain will never accept, our bodies will never accept synthetic estrogen and progesterone the same way that even bioidentical progesterone, like, if you go to a NAPRO doctor, which is a natural procreative technology doctor, they will do a blood test. If you're having any issues, they will, basically give you bioidentical progesterone, which is not the same as what is in the pill, what is in hormonal IUDs. And I know doctors who are not even Catholic, who are not even religious, who are speaking out against what synthetic hormonal contraception is doing to women. So one of the main things is, number one, the World Health Organization has classified the pill as a type 1 carcinogen, which is like on the level of like formaldehyde, right? So it's like people who eat all organic and they get like, they go to Whole Foods and they eat all organically, but then they're ingesting the pill, which is a carcinogen. It makes no sense, which is actually why I think there's a growing number of women who aren't even religious, who are seeing how much hormonal birth control is messing them up. It's messing up, it depletes so many vitamins and minerals in your body, B12, it depletes all this stuff, and they're feeling terrible. They are getting off of it because they realize, like, it doesn't make me feel good. But so it's a group 1 carcinogen. Blood clots, that's like actually one of the main things that the birth control pill does, is it clots your blood. In fact, I had a girl who was an emergency room doctor tell me, she's like, we actually use the pill to clot people's blood if like they're bleeding out. And I'm like, but you mean just women? Like, what do you use for the men? Because you probably could use something different, right, for the women, but you use the pill because you know it clots their blood. In fact, women who are on the pill, they have an increase of 3 to 4 times blood clots than women who aren't on the pill. And obviously, if a blood clot goes to your brain, it goes to your lungs, it goes anywhere. You could have a heart attack, stroke, deep vein thrombosis, you could have pulmonary embolism. I mean, this is extremely dangerous. I have a friend who's a speech therapist, and she worked with a young woman who was in her early 20s. She had to reteach her how to speak because she had a stroke from the pill. I mean, this is, if you just type in the pill consequences, you will see just so many women and what they've said, the side effects of the pill. Another thing, breast cancer. If someone is on the pill, they have an increase of 60% chance of getting breast cancer. And this is even IUDs, hormonal IUDs as well. Cervical cancer tripled for women who were on the pill for 5 to 9 years, and it quadrupled for women who were on the pill for more than 10 years. Now, thank God, if you get off the pill, thankfully, some of these things start to go down. So if you are on the pill and get off, like, your body's already going to start kind of healing, okay? The problem with this is that most doctors, actually not most, all doctors in medical school, and this is what makes me so upset, all doctors are taught in medical school to prescribe the pill for anything that's a woman problem. Like I have asked every single Catholic doctor friend of mine, whether they're an OBGYN, internal medicine, I said, were you taught just to prescribe the pill? And they said, yes. That's all we were taught, to prescribe it for endometriosis, to prescribe it for PMS, for acne, it's like, because the pill is a $4 billion industry and it's all about money, but unfortunately, it doesn't make a lot of money to have individualized healthcare for women, to do a blood test, to have them chart their cycle and to find out what's actually happening, maybe to actually help heal endometriosis, to actually help heal PCOS. So anyways, I'm going to keep going. So one of the things the pill does is it messes up our pheromones. And our pheromones, when a woman is ovulating in her cycle, when her estrogen starts going up, this is around, so in the first week a woman has her period, let's say just in a general 28-day cycle, the first week a woman has her period, around, day 13, the estrogen starts going up. And when a woman, then this is when a woman is ovulating, this is when she is fertile. This is when a woman, they've done studies that said a woman's estrogen is like the beautifier of a woman. It makes her cheeks look pinker, her lips look fuller. They've done studies that said an average woman actually looks more beautiful than a supermodel when the average woman is ovulating, she's fertile. They did a study where even women's voices change when they are ovulating. And this is why a lot of opera singers will be put on the pill, because they don't want their voices to fluctuate throughout the month. So, but they said that when a fertile woman was speaking, 20% of men, their skin would tingle when they heard a fertile woman speak. I mean, this is how the amazing thing of estrogen, but what also happens is that pheromones are released. Pheromones are kind of these scent, and this is why we put perfume on our necks and our wrists, because we're releasing pheromones. So pheromones will attract people who are, their biochemistry is different than our own, okay? So because we don't want to be mating with our own family members, because that's actually not good for the, human race. So we actually, when these pheromones will help us to be attractive, we smell people's pheromones and they smell our pheromones. And they've done crazy studies about, one of the crazy studies was they had all these chimpanzees. And they had a male chimp, like the alpha male chimp, and they put one of the female chimps on the pill, and the male chimp completely avoided her because she wasn't, these pheromones weren't coming. When you're on the pill, what the pill does, it makes your body think you were pregnant. So you don't ovulate, you don't have a cycle. It tricks your body into thinking you're pregnant. So the male chimp completely avoided her, and he went to the other female chimps. Well, when they put all the female chimps on the pill, the male chimp started going crazy. He started doing very, very bad things. And so, I mean, this is like, oh my gosh, and another thing that pheromones do is that they've done studies about that when women are on the pill, again, it makes your body think you're pregnant. You actually surround yourself, or you're more attracted. You want to surround yourself with people who are safe to you, more kind of like your father, right? Or your brothers. So you're actually kind of more attracted to people of your own biochemistry. I have heard stories of women who were on the pill that when they got off the pill, they were attracted to different types of men, or they got off the pill, and some women were actually disgusted if they were on the pill when they got married to somebody and then they got off the pill. Some of them were disgusted by the smell of their husband because maybe their biochemistry was similar, right? So it changes your pheromones. Another thing is that it messes with the environment. When women go to the bathroom, they are excreting estrogen into the water systems. So this has been found in so many rivers, but this one study I think it was back in 2006, the U.S. Geological Survey found in the Potomac River that 80% of male fish, because of all the estrogen in the water, they were downstream from probably like a waste facility treatment center. 80% of the male fish started growing female reproductive organs because of the estrogen in the water. And actually I remember that was one of the first studies, but even England, they found it. In Seattle, they did a study where there's salmon that was turning because of the estrogen in the water. And we are drinking this. It's really hard to get estrogen out of water systems. And you can do it, but it costs a lot of money. So we are drinking estrogen in our water. So it's hurting the environment. And then one of the last things, and I think this is probably one of the worst things about the pill, obviously, because the mechanisms of the pill, the first mechanism is that it prevents you from ovulating, but sometimes there can be breakthrough ovulation. And basically, in essence, if you're having sex and you're on the pill, you can conceive a child. And if there's this breakthrough conception, but one of the secondary mechanisms of the birth control pill and these hormones is that a woman's basically her endometrium or her lining of her uterus becomes uninhabitable for the egg. And essentially, the pill is an abortifacient, meaning you have an abortion, you miscarry this child. But the pill, that's what the pill does. It essentially is trying to prevent you from getting pregnant. And in fact, they changed the definition of pregnancy around the time the pill was created, because they were like, we know as Catholics that we are pregnant at the moment of conception, right? That a new life is born.
Yeah, just biology.
A new life, a new life is created at the moment of conception. Well, they changed the definition of pregnant, not to the moment of conception, but they changed it to the moment of implantation. When the whole pill was happening, because they were like, oh, well, we don't want people to think that that you're actually pregnant and you're aborting this child. But one of the main mechanisms of the pill is that it's an abortifacient. So, and there was a study done that 3 out of 10 women, if they had known this about the pill, they would never be on it. So there are a lot of married women who are on the pill that if they knew that in a lot of their cycles, if they are having sex with their husband, but they're on the pill, they're actually creating new lives, but their body, because of the pill, is essentially aborting the child. So the study was that 3 out of 10 women, if they knew that this was a mechanism of the pill, they would never be on it. So
oh my gosh.
The pill is not good for our health, and any hormonal contraception is not good for our health, our environment, even our romantic relationships with the whole pheromone thing. Yeah. So I'm really glad that actually more non-religious people are kind of getting off the pill. They are speaking out against hormonal contraception and kind of how bad it is for our bodies. And I've heard people say, can you imagine men having to do this? Men would be like, no way I'm gonna have all the side effects. But it's but women, again, we have done this to women, and women for some reason are okay with it. So yeah.
Dang, that's just, there's just so much that's happening just with one pill. This one pill that's just constantly being prescribed by doctors and is just encouraged so much throughout our culture. It's just assumed that you use it. And yet there's just so much that shows that you shouldn't be using it. It's changing your own biology. It's changing our own ecosystem. It's affecting everything around us. And we're not really talking about it. Our society isn't pushing this. And why? And this point about contraception, that it's not just the Christian church that's against it, but doctors are against it. But in fact, Christianity used to be totally unified in its proclamation of the gospel, in its proclamation against contraception. We used to all be united on this issue. But what happened with that? What happened with the history? Why is it that it seems that it's mainly just Catholics that emphasize that contraception is wrong?
So basically, up till 1930, every single Christian denomination was absolutely against contraception. In fact, Luther and Calvin had scathing things to say about contraception, and even people who didn't want children. I pulled this one quote. I'm just going to read this because I was like, "Whoa, Luther, you are." Whoa. He said, "The purpose of marriage is not to have pleasure and to be idle, but to procreate and bring up children to support a household. Those who have no love for children are swine, stocks, and logs, unworthy of being called men and women." And I was like, whoa, hey there, buddy. Like I've just read other of their comments, like Luther and Calvin. I was like, oh my gosh, like they were so against contraception. And in 1930, the Anglican Church at the Lambeth Conference, they basically decided that husband and wives can use contraception if they want to regulate births, right? And the people were definitely thinking, and as the culture began to be more pro-contraception, again, the Anglican Church folded, and they said, okay, well, and absolutely people thought the Catholic Church was going to fold as well. Well, even when there was like a group of Catholics brought together to discuss whether or not contraception should be okay, the majority of them said, yes, contraception should be allowed. And Pope Paul VI, that was the counsel he got, was like, yes, contraception should be allowed. And then comes Humanae Vitae. and I think it was 1968, Humanae Vitae. And people thought, oh, for sure, the church is going to get with the times, change the teaching on contraception. And he completely reinforced the purpose of sex, the purpose of marriage, what it is for, and that is completely illicit to use contraception. And in this document, he talks about the licit ways, because he does call couples to be responsible parents. So in the document, in the encyclical, he say we do need responsible parents, and not every family can have, even though children are a gift, right? They're so, not every family can have 10, 12 kids, 20 kids, wasn't St. Catherine of Siena, it was like number 24 or something, right? Not every family. So it is okay to regulate births, but it has to be in accordance with the dignity of the human person and the dignity of sex. And so he talked about, again, illicit means and licit ways of spacing births or regulating births. But basically, up until 1930, every Christian denomination believed that contraception was a grave sin. And unfortunately, again, not even most Catholics use contraception. And I want to assume the best, and assuming the best, that most of them have no clue why the church teaches what it does, right? I really think that a lot of people, because I have heard a lot of people say, man, why didn't I know this? Why wasn't I taught this, right? Especially when Bobby and I give talks about marriage and sex and contraception, we talk about contraception. And I'll tell you from my own personal experience, this was actually one of the things of my conversion. This was like one of the things I was like, why would the church tell you that you couldn't do this, right? And I had a leader. I was at a Steubenville youth conference, and I was like, it was a young apostle. I was a young apostle. I was there for a week, and one of my leaders was talking about how she and her fiance were learning about NFP, and all the girls were like nodding their head, and I'm like thinking, what is that? Like, I don't know. I just, again, in my family, I was nominally Catholic. I thought, of course, you just use contraception when you get married, right? You can do anything when you get married. And everyone's like nodding their heads, and I started feeling very uncomfortable. And I went home from that week. I had a huge conversion in my faith, fell in love with Jesus. I went home and started studying the church's teaching on contraception, and my whole life was changed, because that was like the last straw. I was like, this is one of the hardest teachings of the church. And I was like, oh my gosh, the church's teachings are so beautiful. They're so beautiful. And actually, they want the best for us. They actually want the flourishing of a marriage, of a husband and wife. And in fact, this actually respects a woman's body. And it almost ensures that a husband is not using his wife. But it's like, it puts the ball in the woman's court, in the sense that when a couple decides to have sex or not have sex is based on the woman's cycle. So as I learned more about the church's teachings, I fell more in love with the church and with Jesus. And my hope is that our Protestant brothers and sisters, and even our Catholic family, will kind of realize, like, oh my gosh, what have we been doing for the last, it'll almost be 100 years. In 2030, it'll be 100 years since this momentous decision by the Anglican Church to allow contraception. And Pope Paul VI's predictions absolutely came true when he talked about, in Humanae Vitae, he said, number one, there will be more infidelity and lowering of morality. Number two, we will lose respect for women, and especially husbands will lose respect for their wives, and wives will become a mere instrument of selfish enjoyment, which Pope John Paul absolutely talks about when he talks about using someone for their own pleasure. And he said, and then the governments will start to abuse power, and especially with this whole population control mentality. All we have to do is look at China's one-child policy and see that governments have already started to say, no, we want you to be sterilized. And there have been many governments who have forced sterilization on the people in the name of whatever, population control, in the name, all these things. And then the last one is that there will be a domination of man over his body. And we have already seen that we think now, if we can have dominion in the area of contraception and we can cut this off from how God created sex, we basically become our own gods, right? Then of course we're going to do that in other areas. So of course, and if the body doesn't mean anything, the sex doesn't mean anything, then I can just be whatever I want. I can do whatever I want. So of course we've seen that with sterilization. We see that with test tube babies. We see that even with gender transitioning, that now we think my body is just kind of this prison that I'm in, and I can just manipulate it however I want. The body has no purpose, sex has no purpose. So Pope Paul was so prophetic, and all these things have essentially come true when he in Humanae Vitae, when he basically wrote this. And I think we need to pray as Catholics that our evangelical brothers and sisters come out in more full force, because I have some friends who already are on the same page as Catholics, but I think it'll come. I think there will be a day.
Dang, that's just so profound. Praise God for Pope Paul VI. The fact that he went against the tide, even within the own ranks of Catholicism. All of the other bishops were thinking, yeah, that's fine, contraception is fine. But Pope Paul VI wrote out Humanae Vitae and argued for the traditional doctrine that you can't change this teaching of the church. Certain things are doctrines, certain things are disciplines that can be changed, but certain things are doctrines and that cannot be changed. And that is one of them, contraception. He laid it all out. That's so perfect. It was so providential that the Lord gave us him, and that's why he's a saint. I'm not, we're all saints in a lower S sense, according to St. Paul, but that's why he's like capital saint, someone that's raised up to a level of admiration and emulation, someone that we can imitate, his teaching on contraception. So we all can be giving this message against contraception. And now, I think you touched on it earlier about Catholicism doesn't just say contraception bad, and all these good reasons for seeing the person as a subject rather than an object, but it also says that natural family planning is acceptable. What is natural family planning? Many people haven't heard of it. So could you expand on that and how that relates to contraception, what the difference is between the two?
Yeah, because a lot of people will say, oh, well, natural family planning is just Catholic contraception. And I always think, oh, really? Then you should try it and tell me how it's different. Because so basically, Pope Paul VI said it is illicit to use contraception, and no matter what your intentions are, right? Because obviously, if our intentions are to not have a child at this moment, you can either sterilize the act of sex and have sex and contracept it and sterilize that act, or the church, and that's an illicit way, or a licit way, which in Humanae Vitae and which has been reaffirmed in the Catechism, is that you can use the times of infertility in a woman's cycle. If you are not, for serious reasons, you have discerned that it is not right at this moment to have a child, You can use the infertile times, the infecund times of a woman's cycle, and you are not sterilizing that act. You are still open. And really, the truth is, there are times that I'm sure many couples have used those infertile times, and God was like, nope, it's time for a baby. And you thought you were infertile, but really, because that's the beauty of NFP. And people still, doctors, and this is why it just, I have been to OBGYNs who have no clue what NFP is. They have no clue what charting a woman's cycle is like, because basically NFP is not the rhythm method. The rhythm method is using past cycles to basically guess what's going to happen this cycle. But the thing is, a woman's cycle is different every single month. It could change if you're sick. It could change if you're stressed. Your days of ovulation can change based on a lot of factors. In fact, a woman's cycle is actually like the 5th vital sign of health. If something is going on, so many times we just think it's normal to, again, I'm super heavy, or I'm having super horrible PMS. No, it's not normal. That means there's something going on. Either there's a hormonal imbalance, maybe there's endometriosis. This is our 5th vital sign as women, and thank God for doctors who've gone beyond med school. Thank God for the OBGYNs who've gone beyond med school, which just taught them to prescribe the pill for anything. And there are OBGYNs who, a lot of them, in the beginning when the pill was introduced and then in vitro fertilization was introduced, there was a guy named Dr. Hilgers who basically wanted to help women. He was like, well, I know that in vitro is not okay, and I know that the pill's not okay. What if we actually found a way to help women in their cycles, help women actually heal endometriosis? What if we actually helped heal PCOS, polyps, cysts, all these things? What if we actually helped women who had serious hormonal imbalances? Some women, when they're every time of the month, one of their hormones is so it tanks that they are depressed or even suicidal every time of the month. It's not supposed to be that way. That's a sign of something that's going on that's not supposed to be going on. So so it is licit in these, if we chart, and NFP charts, it can chart cervical mucus, which is what the Creighton model does. It essentially, a woman charts her cervical mucus and it tells her when she's ovulating, because the rhythm method, again, was last month's data or the last 6 months data trying to figure out, well, when am I going to ovulate? But NFP is real-time data. You are charting day by day, seeing, am I fertile today? Again, because every month it could be different. And so, am I fertile today? Are we not fertile? And if we are deciding to avoid pregnancy at this moment, it is absolutely licit for a couple to make use of those infertile periods and have sex, because they are not sterilizing the act, right?
Yeah,
they are
totally
not
natural.
using contraception.
Yeah.
And so when people are like, well, NFP and contraception are the same, it's like, well, no, it's not. The intention might be the same, we're trying to, or the end might be the same, we are trying to avoid children, but the means is not the same. One of them is not sterilizing the act. They're having sex during infertile period. And one is actually having sex maybe during a time of fertility, and they are sterilizing that act. So that's the difference between maybe the end is, I need to feed my family and I need to make money, but the means could be, well, one way is I could get a job and make money, or the other means is I could go rob a bank. We clearly know that the end does not justify the means, and that one of those means is licit and what is not licit. So that's the same with contraception and NFP. And I'm like, NFP requires a lot of self-control, and it requires a couple to communicate. It requires tenderness and love, because there are a couple weeks out of the month, if you have a serious reason, which the Pope also, I love this, the Pope doesn't give the reasons that are serious reasons. The Pope leaves it up to a well-formed couple of what constitutes a serious reason, and basically with a formed conscience of, what, maybe we're not right now, we just maybe need to wait a couple months. The couple discerns for themselves, and no one on the outside can judge what is happening in a marriage, because no one else knows, right? It's the couple that's discerning. So, and it's a well-formed couple, right? And so, yeah, when people say that, I'm like, well, why don't you try NFP and tell me if it's the same as contraception, because it's not. There's a lot of self-mastery and self-control, and a lot of, again, learning how to love your spouse when you're married, and actually you could have sex, and it's a very good thing, but you're deciding not to, especially when a woman is fertile. Oh man, that takes a lot of self-mastery. So yeah, they're very different.
Dang. So all right, we've covered so much Oh man, so much, but it's all so good. It really just unpacks this whole understanding of where the church is coming from. You know, so many people don't understand why the church says that this is wrong, but there's so many reasons. We've already gone over them for the last almost 50 minutes. There's so much truth that the church has to offer to us if only we're willing to listen. So what have we covered so far? We've gone over just the philosophical understanding of what is sex, the nature of it, that it's supposed to be a total, complete gift of self that's open to life, faithful and fruitful. We've covered all of the scientific reasons for why you shouldn't use the pill. We've covered the fact that just throughout history, all of Christianity has said this is wrong. And we also have covered natural family planning, that this is something that you can use, which isn't a contraceptive method. It isn't a method of anti-life or I don't want the gift, but you're still open to the gift. It's totally natural. It's not just trying to sterilize something or trying to put an obstacle in the way. Rather, it's totally natural. So there's just so much to the church's teachings that are amazing. So I would encourage the listener also, if you want to know more about this, to check out Jackie's website, JackieandBobby.com. You can also check out Humanae Vitae. You can just type it in on the internet, and the Vatican has a website that has all of the different documents. You can look up Humanae Vitae and read for yourself what the church has to say. So I greatly appreciate your time, Jackie. You've gone over so much for us. You've helped us out so much. So yeah, grace and peace to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, well, you, the listener, have a blessed rest of your day, and I'll see you next week. Next week we're going to be, what are we discussing next week? I believe that is the existence of the soul, the mortality of the soul, and I'll have Dr. Joseph Trabick on the show then. But until then, grace and peace. I'll see you.